Welcome to the Roman Right with Brian Newberry, where Christ is King and Rome is home. It is April 1st, 2026. Happy April Fool's Day to all you atheists out there, because the fool in his heart saith there is no God, according to the Psalms, right? So tonight, more controversy coming your way, more humor to go with the controversy, hopefully. Tonight we're going to be discussing men, women, and the order of creation. Now, I've done a video about this before on Instagram before I started this channel, so this is going to be a repeat. So for those who have seen that video, this will be almost the same, but a little bit more content to go with it. Have the same t-shirt, Queen Isabella, Boss Lady, Reconquista. Need that today more than ever. Free Europe, right? And before we get started, of course, I want to promote my most recent book, The Men in White, The Ultimate Catholic Controversy, Volume 2, Brian Newberry, S. Clark. Check it out on Amazon. You will not be disappointed. Awesome book. So, without further ado, let's get into it. And no, it is not a coincidence that I'm doing a show about men and women on April Fool's Day. Totally coincidence, right? Or did I say it wasn't a coincidence, or did I say it is? I don't know. Not a coincidence. I had been planning to do that show. Let me adjust this camera here. Let's go that way. There we go. Okay. And pull up this screen here. Okay. So, for those of you who are like me, a bit antisocial, spend a lot of time online, watching podcasts, watching clips, looking at the comments section, you might have been noticing that a lot of internet influencers that do shows, they're seemingly, especially young men, very anti-woman, you could say. Some might say misogynistic. Some might say, oh, they're just trolling, they're exaggerating. Whatever the case may be, there is a little bit of anti-woman sentiment here going on, especially with the youth. And, conversely, you might say that with young women, there is a little bit of anti-man sentiment. So we're going to not even the playing field, of course, because that would be unnatural. But we're going to add some nuance so it's not over the top one way or the other. We're going to introduce a little bit of natural law and some common sense and practicality here, because it's one thing to identify a problem. It's quite another to know how to resolve the problem in a way that's practical and feasible according to modern conditions. Now, of course, I did a show about restoring tradition and some of the ways that can be done. And it's not always about nostalgia, right? It's not always like saying, oh, if we could only go back to the Leave It to Beaver days in the 1950s, or, pick a date. Back to the Little House in the Prairie days, where everybody knew their roles and everybody was working all the time, and leisure time and decadence was not really much of an issue. Well, fast forward to 2026, if you live in an urban area or even a semi-urban area, technology has increased. Modernization is in place. Bad philosophy and theology is rampant. So, we identify certain problems, and getting out of the ditch, so to speak, you can't keep digging the same hole. So you have to think a little bit outside of the box, apply some ancient wisdom in a modern setting in a way that we can get to where we need to get. So, like I said, a lot of the influencers you might see online making a lot of content, they have these incel attitudes. When I say incel, that means like involuntary celibate, people who are just so misogynistic that they are odious, and no woman wants to be with a man like that. Or, if they do, it's only because it's a challenge or something, right? And then you have some others that are kind of making content about they want to abolish the 19th Amendment. For those of you not familiar, the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote in the United States. So they think that because the majority of women vote liberal, that if they abolish the 19th Amendment, that might solve the problem. Well, the problem with that is a lot of men also vote liberal. And the reason why a lot of men might vote liberal is because they might want to impress women, because they have either a conscious or a subconscious desire to have sex with them. So they want to please them and kind of think and act the way they do. But in theory, if you abolish the 19th, then they don't have to impress them anymore, and then they could vote like men. But I think the problem's a little bit deeper than that. And in a reality, in the United States of America, in the current climate, how in the world, unless you have some kind of dictatorship going on, are you going to abolish the 19th Amendment? Constitutionally, you need a lot of votes in the House and the Senate, and it's just not practical, and it's not going to happen. So, I mean, and I guess it's okay as a talking point to make people think about what civil rights actually are, and which rights are good for us, and which so-called rights that are granted by the government are not good from us, what rights come from God, and which rights do not come from God. I guess it's good for conversation, but in a practical sense, the idea that we're going to abolish the 19th Amendment, it's not going to happen. And also there are a good number of women who don't vote liberal, so that's not going to solve the problem. Like I said, it's not productive, it's not practical. All right, so let's cover some of the complaints that a lot of young men have about women, and you'll hear them on a lot of these podcasts, a lot of influencers making clips. They'll complain that a lot of young women have a high body count. For those of you not familiar with that terminology, that means number of men they've had sex with. They complain about the e-girls, online girls who are scammers. They want you to subscribe to their OnlyFans. They make these Instagram reels, dressed really promiscuously and revealing. And basically those are kinds of forms of prostitution because they do so in order to get money. So they complain about that, legitimate complaints, right? Another complaint young men might have is that a lot of their contemporary women have liberal politics, or they're feminists, right? They complain about that, and that's not attractive to them. Another complaint is that they're very bossy and they make unrealistic demands on men, so they say. Another complaint is hypergamy, which means you have women in a lower economic class. They do everything they can to marry into an upper class, i.e. they're money-oriented or they're materialistic, and they are not interested in men who are equal, economically speaking, or below them, right? And then on the flip side, the complaints against so-called conservative women, or they might call them trad wife LARPers, right? Traditional, women who pretend to be traditional. They wear a sundress on camera, and they appeal to traditional Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, and traditional Protestants. But in reality, they're just as liberal or feministic as the self-described feminists, right? So that they tell men how to be a real man. They try to correct men all the time, and that's a turnoff to a lot of men also, because what's the difference between a feminist and a woman who claims to be traditional but in reality is very bossy and makes demands about what a real man should be and so forth? So you have all these complaints, and so a lot of them are legitimate, and a lot of them, you can counter, right? So you have, like, for example, you have young girls with a high body count. Well, who's giving them the high body count? Of course, they don't do it by themselves. It takes men to give them a high body count. So it takes two to tango. You've heard the expression, right? And if you're complaining about young girls turning 18 and opening an OnlyFans account so they can make millions of dollars by, it's going to be a little bit crude here, turning sexual tricks for money. But who's subscribing to these websites? Men are subscribing to these websites. So you have men who are also acting very degenerate and partaking in decadence and so forth, who are watching the Instagram reels. I'm sure some other women watch them occasionally. Where do you think they get the ideas from? But predominantly it's the men who are watching them, and As a result, the e-girls are getting paid, right? And the e-girls are going after men to scam, not women for the most part. So it's not, you can complain about these things, but you also have to scold the men for enabling them to do that, right? The liberal politics, I don't really think, that's just, it is what it is. That's a deep rooted issue that goes back centuries, actually, French Revolution and so forth. It is a legitimate complaint about a woman who claims to be traditional and then wants to always boss men around, tell a man what a real man should be like. It might not be exactly her place to do that. It's really the place of other men and older men to correct the men on how to step their game up, so to speak. And as me, I'm noticing a lot of these podcasters that are having these real negative attitudes about women, and they're a little bit younger than me, some of them young enough to be, my own sons. I'm 48, I'm a Generation Xer. So a lot of these are, Gen Zs, Zoomers, and Gen Alphas. So I'm kind of like Big Uncle X, putting my arm around them. I'm not trying to discredit them or destroy them. I'm just trying to offer a little bit of a filial correction, I guess you could say. So let's flip that around now. What are some of the complaints that young women have about their contemporary young men? They'll complain that they're immature, that they spend too much time gaming, playing video games, and not improving their character, their virtue, their skills. They might complain that they're too involved with sports, right? They have a man cave with football jerseys everywhere and sports memorabilia everywhere. And so that might be a complaint, right? And they also might complain that they don't have the means to provide, or they have lack of income. And that can be legitimate because it is a man's duty to be able to provide for a family. They also might complain that they have addictions. They're addicted to pornography, alcohol, drugs. Now, some of these things are obviously, very legitimate criticisms, right? I mean, it's one thing to have some leisure time and you want to wind down, play a video game. Some people might think that's unbecoming, of a traditionalist or a Catholic or so, or, they might say things like that. But I think leisure time's important. And, not everybody plays chess anymore. Not everybody plays, Monopoly or Scrabble. So, games, there's always been games, in the ancient times they had games, right? Dice games and so forth. So, just because the games are electronic now, it doesn't make them any less of a game. And in principle, it's the same, right? You might say, well, board games are, they apply more this or that. I'm not going to make the argument, for or against video games. I'm just saying games are games, right? Sports, yes, they can be a bit of a distraction from important things in life. And yes, a man should not have a man cave. The man should have the man house, right? And the woman house. It's marriage is 100-100. It's not 50-50, and a man shouldn't have to hide in his own little corner of the house where he has all of his childhood memorabilia, sports memorabilia, Legos, posters of his favorite cartoons or movies, that kind of stuff. Yeah, that can be a bit juvenile, I would say. And of course, addictions like pornography, alcohol, drugs. Some people are genetically inclined to have an addictive personality. So, if you fall in that category, you have to be extra cautious about those things that give you a dopamine rush. And yes, they could be very addictive, just like gaming can be addictive also. Just the idea of having this constant rush can be addictive. A lot of time, that's what solitude is for, asceticism, to kind of get away from those things. We're almost in Easter right now, so we're still in Lent. Lent is a great time to kind of get away from some of these things, these dopamine rushes, to take control over our minds, take control over our bodies, and have some discipline. Yes, all of these things are legitimate complaints, right? And we're going to get into, a little bit later in the show, we're going to get into the nature of complaining and which direction complaints are supposed to go. So, now I'd like to read something that I saw an online post, and it's a little bit funny, a little bit crude also. So if you're a PG, a rated PG or rated G only person, this might be a little bit too much. I don't think so, but some people might get offended about it. So this was an ad that was seen in New York on Craigslist by a woman seeking for a man. Right, so you're going to have the woman giving the ad and then a man responding. It's a little bit humorous, but it kind of goes into the complaints we're talking about. Right, so here's how it reads. What am I doing wrong, she says. Okay, I'm tired of beating around the bush. I'm a beautiful, spectacularly beautiful 25-year-old girl. I'm articulate and classy. I'm not from New York. I'm looking to get married to a guy who makes at least $500,000 a year. I know how that sounds, but keep in mind that $1 million a year is middle class in New York City, so I don't think I'm overreaching at all. Are there any guys who make $500K or more on this board? Any wives? Can you send me some tips? I dated a businessman who makes average around $100,000 or $150,000 a year, but that's where I seem to hit a roadblock. $150,000 won't get me to Central Park West. I know a woman in my yoga class who is married to an investment banker and lives in Tribeca, and she's not as pretty as I am, nor is she a great genius. So what is she doing right? How do I get to her level? Here are my questions specifically. Where do you single rich men hang out? Give me specifics. Bars, restaurants, gyms. What are you looking for in a mate? Be honest, guys. You won't hurt my feelings. Is there an age range I should be targeting? I'm 25. Why are some of the women living lavish lifestyles on the Upper East Side so plain? I've seen really plain Jane boring types who have nothing to offer married to incredibly wealthy guys. I've seen drop-dead gorgeous girls in singles bars in East Village. What's the story there? Jobs. Any jobs I should look out for? Everyone knows. Lawyer, investment banker, doctor. How much do these guys really make? And where do they hang out? Where do the hedge fund guys hang out? How do you decide marriage versus just a girlfriend? I'm looking for marriage only. Please hold your insults. I'm putting myself out there in an honest way. Most beautiful women are superficial. At least I'm being upfront about it. I wouldn't be searching for these kinds of guys if I wasn't able to match them in looks, culture, sophistication, and keeping a nice home and hearth. Here's the answer. A man's response to it. Dear person, I read your posting with great interest and have thought meaningfully about your dilemma. I offer the following analysis of your predicament. Firstly, I'm not wasting your time. I qualify as a guy who fits your bill. That is, I make more than $500,000 a year. That said, here's how I see it. Your offer, from the perspective of a guy like me, is plain and simple a crappy business deal. Here's why. Cutting through all the BS, what you suggest is a simple trade. You bring your looks to the party and I bring my money. Fine, simple. But here's the rub. Your looks will fade and my money will likely continue into perpetuity. In fact, it is very likely that my income will increase, but it is an absolute certainty that you won't be getting any more beautiful. So in economic terms, you are a depreciating asset, and I am an earning asset. Not only are you a depreciating asset, your depreciation accelerates. Let me explain. You're 25 now and will likely stay pretty hot for the next 5 years, but less so each year. Then the fade begins in earnest. By 35, stick a fork in you. So in Wall Street terms, we would call you a trading position, not a buy and hold. Hence the rub, marriage. It doesn't make good business sense to buy you, which is what you're asking. So I'd rather lease. In case you think I'm being cruel, I would say the following. If my money were to go away, so would you. So when your beauty fades, I need an out. It's as simple as that. So a deal that makes sense is dating, not marriage. Separately, I was taught early in my career about efficient markets. So I wonder why a girl as articulate, classy, and spectacularly beautiful as you has been unable to find your sugar daddy. I find it hard to believe that if you are as gorgeous as you say you are, that the 500,000 hasn't found you, if not only for a tryout. By the way, you could always find a way to make your own money, and then we wouldn't need to have this difficult conversation. With all that said, I must say you're going about it the right way. Classic pump and dump. I hope this is helpful, and if you want to enter into some sort of lease, let me know. Right? So I thought that was an awesome response to a woman who has her priorities wrong, to say the least, materialistic, money-oriented, trying to marry up, hypergamy, like I said. So you have these complaints going back and forth. So let's go back to a kind of natural law approach to males and females, right? So what is a man naturally inclined to do, and what is a woman naturally inclined to do or to be like? So men are the active creature in creation, right? And women are the passive creature. Biology confirms this. Just think about intercourse. The male gives, the woman receives. That's just how creation works. That's God's creation, right? Men create, women sustain, right? You need both creation and sustainability to have good things, right? To keep things good. You need both, right? So it's not one is better than the other. And what feminism actually is, feminism is the desire to usurp a role or position that doesn't belong to the female, right? So in this case, it would be the woman who wants to create and demand that the men sustain instead, right? So they want to flip it on its head, right? It's the women who want to be the active creature, and they want the men to be the passive creature. And you see that a lot in our society. You have very aggressive women. I'm not talking about merely economically or merely sexually or personality-wise. It kind of goes across the board. And then you have a lot of men who are effeminate and feminine. There's a difference between the two. Effeminate is the desire to avoid arduous and difficult tasks, and being feminine would be like being limp-wristed, sodomite type, and that sort of thing, right? And then you have women who want to be butch and masculine, and then you have the whole transgender dysphoria issue and everything like that, right? So you have all this, this inversion of nature is what we would call it. So this is not necessarily even a theological thing. This applies to natural law. This is something that everybody can kind of observe and see the problems here, right? So let's continue. Men challenge nature, women remake it, right? So it is men who are the conquerors. We, for the most part, are the ones who create inventions. It is men for the, I don't know, are there any female philosophers, like classical philosophers? I mean, they're all men. It is men who do these deep dives in thought, in theology, and thought, and the women do not generally conquer nations, invent things, or philosophize, right? So it is men who mirror God's active act of creation, right? So God spoke and it became, right? So men, we can't speak things into existence, but we can take the materials that are already in existence and upgrade them and make greater inventions, right? Women mirror God's passive act of the subsistence of what has already been created, right? Cultivation, nurture, right? A woman carries another human being in her body for 40 weeks. So naturally, the woman is going to be more nurturing to the child, and that's of necessity. A child needs both nurture and also needs the father to show the child what masculinity is about, right? So you have creation and you have sustenance, right? And it is the seed of the man that is the active element, and the woman's egg is the passive soil which must be fertilized, ready to foster life given by the seed, right? I know that might be a little graphic, but not really. It's just scientific, right? So it's the sperm that actually swims upstream, so to speak, to find the egg, right? It's the active element. The egg is just there. It receives the sperm and creates life, right? So it's what's interesting that even, in pagan societies, pagan theology even mirrors these basic natural law constructs, right? So you have, pagan deities, all the sky deities were masculine, right? The sun god, the rain god, the cloud riders, those are masculine gods. The earth deities, or the earth goddesses, are all feminine, right? Because the rain acts as the semen, and the soil absorbs it just like the egg does of the woman, right? So you have the sky deities are active, and the earth fertility goddesses are receiving. I'm not advocating paganism, but all I'm saying is that even the pagans got that part right. So let's get theological about it now. Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, right? So why did Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden? Well, for one, it was Eve who was speaking to the serpent, where Adam was next to her, kind of listening, right? It is Eve who ate the forbidden fruit first, and Adam was there with her. And because men have a general tendency to want to please their women and not be disagreeable if it's not necessary, or in that case it was necessary, Adam was weak, and he was passive, and Eve was active. So it flipped it around, So it's kind of modern problems have always been a problem, right? When you usurp the role that goes to your partner, to the opposite sex, problems happen, right? So instead of Adam stepping in and telling Eve not to talk to the serpent, or Adam himself speaking to the serpent instead, he allows Eve to converse with the serpent. So you might even say that Eve was the first theologian, because she's talking, theology with the serpent. Like, did God really say that? Because Eve said, "Oh, God said not to touch the fruit lest we die," and then the serpent says, "Did God really say that?" So it's a theological conversation, right? So, but Adam is passive, right? That's the problem. So they were cast out of Eden because of Adam's lack of activity, his lack of assertiveness, right? But he does redeem himself once they were kicked out, right? So it is the acts of Adam that a new civilization was born, and even from his progeny, even from from Cain and Cain's descendants, which are viewed as in a negative term in Genesis, it was the Cainites who built cities. They had these massive building projects. They learned how to breed animals, make tents, make music, make culture, right? So it was always the men who were doing these things, and they were having lots of children and living, many, many years, even centuries, right? Right. So going back to the original talk about men and women complaining about each other, complaints usually go up and not down, right? So in the hierarchy of the household construct, where the husband is the head, right, and the woman, you could say, is the neck or the heart, right? So what does the scripture say? The scripture said, just as Christ is the head of the church, so is the husband the head of the wife, right? And the children have to be obedient to the husband and the wife. So it's a hierarchy, right? So men are not the complainers. It is not men who should be complaining to those, who are below them in the hierarchy. In the matters of authority, men complain upwards. We cry out to God, but we don't complain to our children. We don't complain to our wives, right? Just like in the workplace, superiors shouldn't be complaining to the workers or their subordinates, right? That's just the nature of complaining. So when I see these young men complaining about women without taking any kind of accountability or responsibility for the actions of men, they're getting it wrong. And I say this, in an endearing way. I'm not, I'm not condemning them. I'm offering an act of filial correction, right? So men, we need to be complaining and correcting men. We don't need to be bashing women, and especially when you say things like it's all women, it's not just a few of them. I know that's rhetoric and hyperbole, but it just gives a bad sound, right? So it's men who need to step up and make sure they're excelling in virtue. And part of excelling in virtue is not complaining to those who are lower on the hierarchy, right? So step your game up. Don't blame women for the way things are. And I'm not saying that the complaints aren't legitimate. I'm just saying the complaints go upward to God, right? And improving the situation begins with yourself, right? It doesn't begin by bashing other people and pushing other people down to elevate yourself. No, elevate yourself in virtue and spirituality. Make yourself valuable, a valuable asset. Make yourself become skilled in something and excel in it, right? That's how you make the correction, right? So the men are the fixers of the complaint. So the wives complain to the husbands, and the husbands, because we love our wives and we want them to be happy, and sometimes, yes, we just want them to stop complaining, but it works, right? We go out of our way to fix it so we don't have to hear the complaining and to make the wife happy. And when the wife is happy, then we eat good, right? Among other things, right? And hearing their complaints and going all out to appease our women, that is according to our nature, right? So back to the Garden of Eden, it was Adam who, when God confronted Adam, Eve, and the serpent, everyone blamed each other, and really the only responsible party that didn't blame someone else was the serpent, ironically. But it was Adam who said, "It was the woman that you gave me, God." So Adam kind of blames God too. He says, "It's the woman that you gave me. She gave me the fruit to eat, and I did eat." Right? He was the responsible agent, though. So in the New Testament theology of original sin, the woman is not blamed for the sin. It's the man, because it was the man's responsibility as the head, right? So again, complaining about the woman or about women that are placed on the earth, you're doing what Adam did, which is, I guess you could say, a result of original sin. We have the tendency to complain outside of ourselves, to point the finger. We've got three pointing back at us. We have a tendency to do that, but that's a sinful tendency. It's not a righteous and virtuous tendency, right? So, and if we want to really change things, it begins with the men. The men have to be the agents of change. It's by men that a rebirth or a new renaissance must begin. So blaming the women cannot be the solution, right? We can't do that. So we have to look inwards, right? Be the man and be the agent of change that the authentic vision of change demands. And once we do that, men, excuse me, once we step up, we build our leadership skills, we build our virtue. Once you lead by example, women by their nature will follow suit, right? How do you, by antagonizing women and trolling them, all you're doing is making them more upset. So once you quench fire, not with more fire, but by water, right? So that's the solution. The solution is not to complain. The solution is not to bash them, be misogynistic. I don't like to use that term, but some people might say that. The solution is to step your game up and build your virtue, build your skill set, and lead by example. So in the current state of things, the enemies of God are having women lead and men following, and this order must be reversed, right? So feminism is actually a Marxist construct, right? So in Marxism, they want both the man and the woman working so they can have double taxation, and then instead of the women raising the children at home while the man works, it's the state, public schools, that raise the children and instill the state values in them. So and the idea of equality across the board, regardless of sex, gender, roles, and tradition. All of that does is it creates an inversion of nature, and it has a tremendous negative consequence, as we see. So we have to reverse this order. And yes, feminism is hostile to the will of God, right? Tradition and hierarchy and love, those are the values of God, right? Embracing our rules, right? Everybody's rules has positive aspects and negative aspects. So don't complain about your rule, embrace it. Take your cross. This is Holy Week. Take up your cross and follow Christ. Die to yourself. Deny yourself. All those things. Submit to the will of God. Submit to the hierarchy created in nature, right? So tactically, being that things are the way they are, and you have so many women in the business place, so many women in politics and leadership roles. We do, I think, as men who have daughters, I myself also have a daughter, we do have to raise our daughters to be strong and to be capable of leadership if necessary as a counteractive to the modern problem. So if you have a large number of men who are effeminate and feminine, then it might be the women who have to do it out of necessity. Like, to give a biblical example, in the Old Testament, in the book of Judges, it was Deborah who was chosen by the Lord to be the leader because the men weren't stepping up. In fact, her counterpart male, Barak, he was a coward. He didn't want to lead. He deferred to Deborah, so Deborah was the leader in that case. And sometimes that's necessary, right? Sometimes, and then you also have exceptional women who have a natural leadership skills, a natural ability to lead. It's not common, right? Like, most men are not really inspired to follow women. That's just in our nature. But there are exceptions, right? So there have been exceptional, strong women leaders of the past, right? In fact, the most perfect creature ever created was the Blessed Virgin Mary, right? Although she wasn't an outspoken leader, she wasn't a military leader, although she does crush the head of the serpent, so she does have a little bit of fight in her, right? And of all creatures, she's the closest to God. She carried God in her body for 9 months. So she's the most virtuous and perfect of all creatures. So it begins there with perfection. Perfection is a woman. But yet she received and accepted the will of God, right? When the archangel Gabriel visited her, she did not argue with him. She did not disbelieve him. She accepted with perfect humility the will of God for her, even though she didn't fully understand it at the time, right? And she is the most perfect model of virtue for all women, right? And then you have biblical leaders, like we already mentioned Deborah. You also have Esther, the queen wife of Xerxes, who saved her people from being slaughtered, right? Then you have virtuous saints in Catholic history, St. Helena, St. Monica. And you have royalty like Queen Isabella, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Marie Antoinette, Mary Tudor, the Queen of Scots, etc. So you do have awesome women leaders of the past who have made a difference in life. So as fathers who have daughters, I think we have to kind of compete with our enemies in a way. We don't capitulate to them. We don't raise our daughters to be feminists, obviously. But at the same time, we don't raise our daughters to be doormats. We don't want them to be trampled underfoot by heathen societies, by people who lack virtue, scammers. We want them to be wise, we want them to be strong, and we want them to be virtuous, right? And we also want to train them, if necessary, to lead if there are no men who will lead. So, right, I just wanted to kind of tie all this together. So we have a lot of young men complaining about women and bashing them without any self-criticism at all, or a criticism of other men. Men need to step it up. Men need to pick each other up, not bash other people, unless they absolutely, merit bashing. Sometimes you have to do that. But once you bash them and you have them down, then you reach out a hand and pick them up, right? That's how we do. We subdue our enemies. We don't let them vanquish us. We don't let our enemies conquer us. We subdue them, and once they are subdued, then we help them. That's what charity is, right? And the same thing, so you have, in the social hierarchy created by God, Adam being the first created human, Eve created from the side of Adam. But notice that Eve also was not created from the foot of Adam, right? Not under his foot, created from his side. She is designed to be by his side, right? She is his helpmate, right? But it is the man whose complaints go to God when he has a complaint in prayer, but not downwards, not even outwards, mostly upwards, almost exclusively upwards, right? And then you have the women who need also to embrace their roles as the passive act of creation, the sustainers of creation, right? to take care of the home, to manage the home, to take care of the children, so the man can be active in his work to provide for the family. And if he needs a little bit of help economically, then obviously the woman can help out by getting a job if she needs to, right? Ideally, one parent should work because it's just better for the children, but we don't live in an ideal situation. So we do have to kind of work with what we have to work with. So that's why I really advocate for kind of raising women to be strong and to do what's necessary in our society. But if we want to turn things around, we do have to lead by example, first and foremost, because it's easy to say it. It's easy to identify the problem. The more difficult problem is to how to solve the problem. How do we get to where we want to get to? But we have to lead by example, of course. And when we do offer criticism, we don't want to bash people. We don't want to trample them underfoot. And we don't want to devalue them, right? Every human being is created in the image of God, and we want to lift them up. We want to extol virtue, right? We want to, encourage them to be virtuous and encourage them to accept the will of God, to accept the roles that God created for males and females. Yes. Because when we cooperate with the created order, when we cooperate with natural law and we cooperate with divine law, the consequences are generally very good. But if we fight against it and we try to usurp our rules, or not our rules, we try to usurp others' rules, if we try to invert the order of creation and be rebellious and go against natural law and divine law, then the consequences will be very negative. So I hope you liked the video. I hope it was fruitful. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, offering you a Roman salute from the bottom of my Roman heart. Nothing but love from the empire. God bless.